I want to start with a question about the skills that it takes to succeed as a Huey pilot in Vietnam who's going in and out of combat situations. And I'm not really thinking so much about skills as I'm thinking about personal qualities and characteristics. And I want to read a couple passages from your memoir that bring this question to mind, and they involve the same theme. And so, in the first case, you're talking about when, the concept of the enemy became concrete in your mind. And you say this life-changing perception came with the muzzle velocity of a bullet. I was close enough to see the dark eyes of the black pajama-clad Viet Cong soldier just now popping up from behind a dry rice paddy dike, shooting right at me. And then later in the memoir, you describe something similar. And you say that in your peripheral vision, you saw a figure in black pajamas pop up chest high over the dike. This had become a common tactic for the VC in the dry season. Common because it was so effective and successful. In that millisecond before touchdown, I turned to look at the figure and saw a Viet Cong soldier with an AK-47 automatic rifle pointed at my face. My fear was so complete and intense, my mind completely blanked. And just to add a little bit more before I kind of rephrase the question, I'm thinking that unlike the ground soldier who has plenty of his own challenges to deal with, you can't jump behind a tree. You're sitting down. You don't have a weapon in your hand, I don't think. Um, and you are, so far as I can tell, pretty defenseless. And you're also in command of a very complicated machine. And so I'm just, and I understand that this is a question that's impossible probably to answer to someone who hasn't experienced it. But whenever I talk to helo pilots who flew in and out of combat situations and experienced what you describe, I always wonder, how in the world do you do that? What does it take to be able to do that? So as someone who experienced it, what are just some of the skills you would say are necessary to to make that possible?
I'll try. It isn't, I don't think it's a skill. I think the right word is attitude. Because I can remember early on in the combat assaults, um, actually having a conversation with myself. And I came to the conclusion that I wasn't going to live through this anyway. So I might as well relax and do my job. And you can't stay scared. And you have to deny your own humanity to do the missions over there because there is so much carnage going on around you. Uh, Other aircraft getting shot down and infantry being wounded and killed. You have to shut that out. And I think that's where a lot of people that come back with PTSD, that's how it happens. They have to stop being themselves and become something else. So for the most part, you've stayed pretty cool. But that little tactic that the Viet Cong had during the dry season, um, that but there's a surprise. Okay, you know you're taking fire, but then all of a sudden there's somebody right there. And fortunately, uh, my door gunner took him out. But it, everybody was skilled. Everybody was good. We were 19 and 20 years old, excellent eyesight, reflexes, all
Yeah.
of that. We were all good. But the ones, if you couldn't somehow internalize everything and forget about everything around you, you weren't going to be able to stay there and fight. And you had to assimilate into that culture, the culture of combat.
So it sounds like you're saying that a key trait or a key ability that it takes to function to do this work, even when you've got a Viet Cong right there and you can look in that VC's eyes. And as you say, your your gunner takes care of it, but I imagine there's a split second where you don't know if that's going to be the case. But the way you and then you got to do the same thing the next day, or maybe even later on that day, you got to go out and do another mission. It sounds like you're saying one of the key capacities that requires is the capacity to, in some sense, shut down normal human stuff.
Exactly what I'm trying to say. Yes. Because you couldn't operate in that environment if you were constantly thinking, I'm going to die, or we're going to get shot down. You couldn't think about that. You just had to fly the missions. And the other thing about combat assaults, insertions, and extractions, when the first time you see one, matter of fact, you'll never forget the first time you actually perform a combat assault. Sometimes the landing zones were prepared by B-52 strikes.
Yeah.
We would fly in afterwards, but usually it was the LZ was just prepared for the landing, for us to land with our own gun team. We had a heavy gun team, 3 Charlie model gunships. And the windows, the windscreen on a Huey is huge. It's like a picture window. And you see the gun team go in, and they've got rockets and grenades, and their door gunner and crew chief are firing tracers into the wood line. And the enemy's firing back. It's very colorful. The enemy had Chinese and Russian ammunition, and their tracers were green and white. I don't remember which was which, it doesn't matter, but our tracers are orange, and it was like a light show or a 4th of July the very first time you go in. And I remember thinking, what have I gotten myself into? I wanted to learn how to fly. So, and the Army was the only one that would take me with 2 years college. So there you are, and you've got to do the job. I mean, my very first combat assault, I was still a co-pilot, brand new, and looking around like, my God, this is what I'm going to live with for a year. So you make an adjustment. You just have to hide your own humanity, bury it somewhere.
Well, you elsewhere in your memoir, you say, you know, that we had to become monsters. And I think when you're describing, when you say that, when you write that, it's a different context. I don't think you're directly relating that to, you know, to what we've been talking about. But is that related though to what you're saying, that to make it through, you do have to shut down some of your humanity? And is that what you're getting at? We had to become something other than fully human, something.
Well, somewhere in that same area of the book, I said that first time you see all this happening around you, you realize we can't do this as nice, wholesome American kids. We do have to change. And I didn't define monster, but to my mind, monsters are like in horror films. They can ravage, just destroy things, and they don't care. And I think that's why I use the term monster. So, but there's no way we could do it growing up in America as, being teenagers having fun and living in a safe environment. There is no way you could do it if you just kept that same mindset. You had to move on.
And at the same time, on at least one occasion, you know, humanity came screaming back. And you know, I've talked to a lot of vets who talk about what you're saying, that you kind of shut down, you know, this weird paradox that this soldier, this Marine, this sailor that you would give your life for on Monday, well, now he's gone on Tuesday. He's been taken out. And so then you just let him go and you shut it out of your mind and you move on. But in some cases, that's not possible. And I want to go back to this quote. Um, this instance we read where that Viet Cong soldier rises with his AK. Say, my fear was so complete and intense, my mind completely blanked. I was incapable of even thinking the words, "Mike, cover me." And if I remember correctly, Mike was your crew chief.
No, Mike was a
Mike was,
door gunner.
okay, Mike was your gunner.
Yeah.
And in that case, he saved your life, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah.
But I understand that Mike himself did not survive the war.
He did not. In the 116th, we had the protocol was that once you became aircraft commander, you had your own ship, your own Huey, and your crew chief. But you had to change co-pilots and door gunners every day. I don't know why they did that. I think part of it, the co-pilot, that was so every co-pilot could learn from the aircraft commander. And we all had different styles and all that. But why they had the door gunner change every day, I don't know. But Mike Goller, he and I flew a few missions, and he told me one day, he said, if we had to, I'd fly straight into hell with you. Because he said, because I think I know you'd fly me back out. So he arranged it somehow with flight ops to where he became my door gunner. And we became very good friends. I mean, it isn't always combat. You insert troops and then go back to a staging area and sit there quietly and wait for the call. And we got to be very good friends. And he loved kids. Every once in a while, we'd be by a village. And I actually saw him one time. I didn't see him put the kid on board, but he knew we were going to a cold area. So he got one of the village kids and put him in there in his jump seat with the gun behind the gun. I didn't see him get on, but I saw the kid get off, and I told Mike, I don't care how much you love kids, you can't do that. Don't do that ever. But he was he was he had this dream that he was going to get out. He got married just before he left for Vietnam, and he tried to go home when his wife was pregnant, and they wouldn't let him go. We needed door gunners. So he just made up his mind. He told me what the dream was. There was a mountain somewhere near his home. He was going to go there for a month with his wife and his baby and no noise, nobody else, just camp. And anyway, like I said, our outfit was short of door gunners. And one day, the gun team was short of door gunners, so they needed Mike to go. They ran into some trouble not too far away from Cu Chi, which was where the 116th was based. And Mike was killed. They took fire and he was killed. And the irony, and that just really tore me up. That was another thing that made me retreat from my own humanity. How could anybody that nice get killed? But the real ironic thing happened just a couple days later because his wife had their baby, and the Red Cross message, if I remember right, takes about 2 days for the Red Cross to notify a soldier. And I'm real sure that the message home from the Department of Defense that we're sorry, but they probably crossed in the mail. It was just, and it ripped me up. Gotta say, it still does.
How far were you into your tour when that happened?
I had to be, I think I made aircraft commander in about 3 months. No, 300 hours. I made it at 270 hours. So I was probably 2 months, 3 months into my tour, the combat tour.
So you had 9 more to go on that tour.
Yes, yeah.
So what was the process? I mean, was it something that you just had to the extent possible, just shut it off and, after a day or two? I mean, what was the process? Because the missions are going to keep coming.
Um, I think anytime you lose somebody, family, friends, whatever, there's that same grieving process. I think it was probably exacerbated by the fact that I had to keep flying, but um,
Mm.
I wouldn't put a time limit on it. I know I wasn't flying very well, and there's a thing inside that says you stay calm. You have to stay calm. You can't be scared. You have to go fly the missions. And I think flying missions too moved me away from that, moved me through that, because flying anything, if you start thinking about something else while you're flying, doesn't matter if anybody's shooting at you, you can kill yourself. So you have to concentrate on the flying. And that probably helped too. So
Wow. How old was Mike?
he had to be 18.
So let's go back to the beginning. You said you were drafted. Um, did you make any attempts not to be drafted, or did you just, go into your late teen years assuming you would be?
It was a different time back then. If your government said we're at war for the right reasons, you believe it. Less so now, but I was having a lot of fun in junior college. Dirt bikes and was going to the desert, and grades were dropping. And then I had a friend that moved to Hawaii and got a 2 bedroom and needed a roommate. And I'd always wanted to learn how to surf. So I thought, well, I'm just going to leave. And I forgot to tell the LA Draft Board I'd left. I'm pretty sure I just forgot. Um, but I got a call from my brother. I was working in a Safeway over there in Honolulu, and I got a call from my brother that I got my draft notice. So I wrote to the draft board and said, hey, I'm in Hawaii. What do we do now? So they assigned me to the Hawaii Draft Board. Just a stroke of luck, because in Hawaii, they had a quota of only 2 Hawaiian people, kids, were to be drafted a month. And they had that quota filled for, I think, 6 or 7 months, which gave me time to talk to all the militaries and find out which one would teach me to fly.
What memories do you have what memories, if any, do you have of the trip to Vietnam? I assume the normal course, you start somewhere in the States and then it's 2 or 3 flights and, before you fly, I'm assuming in your case it'd be Tan Son Nhut that you fly into. Yeah, do you have any recollections of that series of flights to
I
Vietnam?
have I have one memory that I think I put it in the book, but for some reason, my lack of understanding of what war was really about. I remember landing at Tan Son Nhut on a 707 midday and thinking, when I get off this plane, it's going to be black. It's going to be all black, all dark. Um, Even though it was, blistering hot outside, it's just, what is war? What is combat? You know? But that's the strangest feeling I ever had.
You kind of had this idea that everything would be the color black.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
I know, can't explain it, but
Yeah. What was your first impression when the doors in the plane opened and you stepped out and touched Vietnam for the first time?
hot and stinky. Um, there was a smell to it and it was like, it had to be 100, 110, something like that out there. So, and of course, you're on a tarmac, which is just cement reflecting the heat up. So that was my first impression. And then they just start giving you orders. Uh, you're Gilderson, you're over here, and so you're over there. And they flew you out. I think within an hour or two, I was sitting in the back of a Huey being flown out to Cu Chi from Tan Son Nhut.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how long would you say it was? Or let me ask a question this way. What was the first thing you saw, heard, experienced that drove home to you the fact that you are now in a war zone?
Um, Actually, on the flight out to Cu Chi, um, the 116th, the Hornets were based at Cu Chi, and not too far away from that once village, now an airbase. I saw the 116th in formation flying a combat assault. I didn't know it, but one of the pilots up front said, "You're going to be something like you're going to be flying with those guys. That's the 116th." You can always tell because they paint one of the main rotors. They paint the top of one main rotor white so that you can always tell it's the 116th when they're flying. But that was my first. And I remember thinking, boy, those guys fly a lot tighter formations than we were taught at Fort Rucker. They must be very good. But then you understood why they flew so tight. So
Why did they fly so tight?
you know, it seems counterintuitive, but the fact of the matter is that you're usually flying 9 ships, and they're staggered either echelon left or echelon right, which gives you all of your M60 machine guns from the crew chiefs and door gunners. It gives them full suppression, and if they're tighter, it actually intensifies that fire. And also, it's a little easier for the gun team to protect a tighter window, tighter group. And the other thing is, actually, the tighter you flew, the more often the updrafts and downdrafts affected all the ships at the same time. So
I see. Yeah. Well, um, in your mind's eye, you can see yourself there. You're flying to Cu Chi. You've never been to Cu Chi. You haven't been there yet. You're on your way for the first time. You see you see the unit that you're going to be working with. You see them operating. So put us in the head of that young man who's heading to Cu Chi for the first time, who knows he's going to be flying in those formations soon. Is he anxious? Is he excited? Is he thinking, let's just get this the heck over with? What's going on with him?
I can remember being a little bit excited about it. But here's the thing about Fort Rucker. It is the most intense and best helicopter flight training on the planet. And more than just flying a helicopter, the belief they put in you, flight school was a year long. And they're teaching you how to fly, but they're teaching you something else, and that is how to believe in yourself and make decisions. And by the time you get your wings, you've graduated, you have a powerful belief in what you're capable of. That's just the belief they put in you. So
Yeah.
Everybody over there was, most of the pilots were 20, 21 like me. And the crew chiefs and door gunners were, my first crew chief was 17. He lied about his age just to get there. But the belief you have in yourself, and then you start flying with these guys. And actually, as a brand new aircraft commander, you fly Chalk 9, Flight of 9, because you haven't proved yourself yet. You made aircraft commander, but they want you as the last aircraft. And that also means the last aircraft was designated medevac if we want, because you can break out of the flight without causing any grief to the other helicopters.
Yeah.
So the first time you do a medevac, you save somebody's, well, you hope you save somebody's life. So again, the belief you have in your own capabilities, and you eventually get to where that helicopter is just like the dirt bike you left at home. It's everything about it. It works for you. It's just an extension of yourself. So that adds to the belief that you're you're a powerful individual, at least with that machine.
You mentioned some of the hardship of war, and probably more of that will come up as we go. You say, though, what I've heard so many other combat veterans say, who also talk about the terribleness of war, the awfulness of war, the way the memories of war hang on you like leeches, draining your energy, robbing you of sleep, etc. But you also say, as many other combat vets say, that there's something about it that you miss. Um, what is it that after the war you found yourself missing about being in that world of war?
I remember saying that I wished I hadn't gone to war, really wished I had never seen some of the things that I saw there, but I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. What you learn about yourself and life and the belief in yourself, you can't get that anywhere else. But there was another thing that happened, and I referred to it as the code, which was, yeah, we'd fly missions and we would take orders, but the highest calling we had, and nobody ever said it out loud, nobody ever wrote about it, but the code was the most important thing we're going to do here is take care of each other. That's why you could fly in under fire to pick up a buddy that was wounded, or that they do it for you. That bond that nobody ever talked about, but we all knew about. It, you, it's an incredible bond. It really is. Matter of fact, my second tour, I was flying. No, end of my first tour, the last month, I ended up flying a two-star out of Saigon, the military governor of Saigon, and just as a fluke. And then I found out that he was going home, and the captain, the aircraft commander on his ship, who I had known in Pasadena, we just bumped into each other one day. He said, "I got to get you out of the 116th." I found out that they were going almost at the same time, going back home. So I asked the detachment commander to send me back to the 116th. And that's when I realized that code was so powerful. I didn't, I felt I had to go back. And fortunately, the detachment commander, who at the time wasn't a very good friend and ended up being the only guy I kept in touch with from Vietnam, he spent 3 days, morning, lunch, and dinner, talking me out of going back. He said, if those guys could get out, they'd get out. You got out, stay out. And then the two-star had called the four-star General Abrams and told him that apparently they were close. And General Richardson told General Abrams, "I got your new pilot for your aircraft, for your Huey." And I never saw paperwork. I didn't realize until I got home a lot later that the FBI had gone through the neighbors and the family to talk about getting a top secret clearance. But one day I was flying the two-star, and a day or so later I was flying the four-star in charge of the whole war. So
Yeah, and I want to come back and ask you about that that second tour flying around General Abrams, and you fly around other VIPs as well, but primarily him. But I'm thinking about this code, and here's my thesis, and let me know if I'm right. As you're doing mission after mission, um, in some cases, doing things that are great, getting, I'm assuming you're getting water to these guys who've run out of water, and their day is going to be a lot better than it otherwise was going to be because they got the water and the medevacs, and getting those guys out, and you've got all of these you've got some experiences where that you've done something good. You've got other experiences that are horrible. Um, but none of it is about when you're there. None of it is about Yankee Doodle. None of it is about the struggle against communism. It's all about the guys you're serving with and getting as many of them home as possible and knowing that they're doing the same thing for you. That's
right.
for the combatant in Vietnam, that is all that war is about.
I think it's all any war is about. Once you get there, I think the first time you see a friend get shot or an aircraft get shot down, it stops being a mission. It becomes personal. And when it becomes personal, it changes your viewpoint. Then you'll do anything at all for the guys around you. But I think every country on the planet counts on that happening. the young kids they send to combat.
Yeah.
Because once you've been shot at, or I got shot at a lot over there. I never even cut myself shaving. I mean, the ship got shot. I lost the co-pilot and the door gunner and the crew chief, and I never got hurt at all. So, uh, but when you see it happening around you, you have to change. You have to assimilate into that environment.
So you say you lost a crew chief, a door gunner, and a co-pilot. So have you then experienced that challenge you often hear from vets? You know, the popular phrase is survivor's guilt.
Yeah, yeah. Why him? Why not me? I mean, um, you've got to work your way through that mentally because it's just serendipity. It's just, a bullet missed you and it hit him. There's no control over that.
So on this first tour, I think you have three general kinds of missions: insertion, extraction, medevac, and I'm sure there's probably other stuff too, but those are the three main things, right?
Right.
And I'm wondering if, so let's focus on insertion. Of all the insertions you did, I don't know, and here we're talking about inserting troops into either, you know, they're gonna patrol or they're gonna set up an ambush or something, but you're inserting troops somewhere. And I don't know how many of those you did, and I don't know if you know exactly the number of insertions you did, but as you think back on them, I wonder if there's one insertion that especially, stands out in your memory.
I'd have to say, I don't know if I already said this, but I'd have to say the very first one. It takes you away from your own comfort zone. I mean, when you see all of the gunfire, the machine gun fire, rockets and everything going off, and you're flying directly into it as a co-pilot, it changes you forever. You just never will forget that. And then you go back in an hour later or several hours later to go extract the troops, and everybody's still shooting. That first mission is life altering.
When you think about the extractions, that is getting the soldiers out, is there one extraction mission that especially stands out in your memory just because of, something particular that happened?
There is one. Um, I was flying Chalk 8, and my very first co-pilot was a kid that I flew in the same day. We came in on the same Huey to 116. His name was Charlie Danielson, and we got assigned to the same hooch, became friends, and then I made aircraft commander just a little bit before him. So he was my very first co-pilot ever. And then a little while later, he was aircraft commander, and he had to fly Chalk 9. I had moved up in understanding how it works and belief in the rest of flight, believing in him. So I was Chalk 8. We were picking up South Vietnamese Army guys and taking fire. And he took a round in his transmission. And that's one of the few. The Huey could take a lot of gunfire, could take holes that went straight through it. Didn't hit anything, but when it hit the transmission, he had to just shut it down. So he and his packs, his Vietnamese, his crew, all ran over and got on my ship. And to this day, I don't know how it worked, but that ship was incredibly overloaded. And I actually, fortunately, it was the dry season, because when it just came to me, in the dry season, the rice paddy dikes are like concrete. So as heavy as we were, I would pick up and just try to land, put the skids down right in the middle on the next concrete dike, because there was a spring to it. Anyway, I don't know how long it took me to get off the ground, but I had to be a good half mile. And the gun team, of course, is overhead watching me. But I finally got up enough airspeed to start climbing and looked in the back, and all I could see was American faces and Vietnamese faces just squashed together. That plane should have never left the ground, truthfully. I don't know why it did. Um, but and then it wasn't too long after that that Charlie got shot down. So I lost him.
I want to ask you about, if there's the most memorable medevac, but you just mentioned South Vietnamese forces. Um, what was your perception of the ARVN forces that the soldiers worked with there in the Cu Chi area?
They were an agrarian culture for thousands of years, and there were things that they didn't understand, and they tried. But artillery clearances, if you were flying somewhere, you had to get an artillery clearance, and the Americans would tell you the azimuth, the height, and when it's happening. But the Vietnamese didn't seem to understand that because I had a round go off underneath me one day. It came from a South Vietnamese artillery. The plane just jumped up in the air, I don't know, 5, 6 feet from the concussion. It wasn't close enough to hurt us, but um, there's a lot of South Vietnamese who I think they were trying, but they didn't understand. When you landed with American troops on board, they would be off that aircraft in 4 to 6 seconds because the helicopter is a big target. But the South Vietnamese weren't as quick to get off. And I know for a fact that there was times when the crew would push them off. So,
Yeah.
because along where there were a big target, so why would we want to stay?
Right.
But there was some. We never got to know any of them because one day out with the 116th was what they call in the military a bastard outfit. It didn't really have any higher ups, and one day, except for pay and maintenance, but one day we'd be flying South Vietnamese ARVNs. The next day we would be flying Cambodian mercenaries, which were basically very, very old men and very, very young boys with very, very old guns. I think the CIA was banned for that. So, because anybody at the right age would have been conscripted in the Cambodian army. So, and they were t-shirts and shorts and flops, flip flops. I mean, just
That's,
amazing,
that's what they're wearing in the battle.
right?
I mean, I guess the Viet Cong are, so they're doing the same thing. I mean, some of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of them, you're right.
Wow. So you had some missions flying Cambodian mercenaries.
Yes.
Wow. Now you say in your memoir that when you're flying medevacs that you're not turning around to see what's happening back there. So so the question is if there is a medevac flight that does especially stand out in your mind, but it may be that there's not one.
No, there is. I think I was, Chalk 9, dropped off the troops, and we weren't more than just a few minutes out of that landing zone, and got a call that one of their guys had been wounded. And when I picked my troops up, there was the guy in charge, 18-year-old E5, I think. And if I remember right, I think his name was Johnson, Sergeant Johnson. And he got on board with, I think, 5 American troops. So anyway, a few minutes out of the landing zone, I get a call. They need a medevac, and we were already in the mix. So quite often we would do medevacs and dust off. They were called in sometimes, but normally we're already there. Dust off maybe several minutes away. People could bleed to death. They were wounded. So I fly back in. The gun team gives me full support, full cover, and this is my first medevac as an aircraft commander. And for some reason, I looked him back, and it was Sergeant Johnson there with both legs gone. And I don't know why I looked back, but he saw me and he grinned. And then he held up, gave him gave me a thumbs up. He was trying to be brave. Actually, he had to be brave. But uh, I never looked him back in any other medevac. And I don't know how many I did, but a few, quite a few actually. But I never looked him back. I just waited for my crew to say, let's go. I didn't want to look him back anymore. That's the most memorable one by a long shot.
If I understand right, you've had some difficulties related to Agent Orange.
Yes, I did. Cucci, well, almost every base over there, they used that defoliant to move the jungle back, um, so that there would be no way the enemy could get really close to the wire. And that was usually done with Agent Orange. Some of the bases it was done with CBs with big bulldozers, but for the most part it was Agent Orange, and we flew in it every day. So I think it was 1995. My stepdad was a surgeon, brilliant doctor. And at Thanksgiving dinner, he said, kept looking at my neck, which is a little bit, what's up with that? He says, I want to see you after dinner. So he pokes around and he says, I want you to go to the VA. I think you have lymphoma. So I went to the VA, and I had Mutual of Omaha or something I was paying for. But he said, nope, go to the VA. And they did some research with me and the family, and nobody in my family had ever had lymphoma. So they determined it was from Agent Orange. I can remember at Cucci one day a flight of 3 C-123 Air Force, but they were rigged as crop dusters. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know the term Agent Orange, but that was a flight of crop dusting C-123s, probably using Agent Orange. There were a lot of things that we didn't know and maybe were not meant to know while we were there.
So you're watching those three planes, crop dusting, and you don't know the term Agent Orange, but you know that it's, this is for defoliation purposes. So at that moment, before we know what the consequences are going to be of all of this, did it seem like a good idea at the time? If somebody asked you, hey, is that a good thing those planes are doing? What do you suppose you would have said at the time?
All we understood about defoliation was that it moved the jungle back to where there was all of our guns outboard at night, the machine guns, the howitzers, the tanks. It gave them a clear line of fire. So the enemy had to be back in the jungle and couldn't get much closer. That's all we knew. And it seemed to be, yes, a good thing. So,
yeah. I want to ask you about your second tour then, very, very different tour. And you've said a little bit about it already, but if you could just summarize that second tour that you did in Vietnam.
I was 21, aircraft commander on the 4 Stars Hewitt. And I learned quite a bit more about that war that was depressing and disheartening, because one of the missions I flew quite often was I'd pick them up at MACV headquarters, which was Military Assistance Command Vietnam, MACV.
And this is Creighton Abrams,
Abrams, yeah.
Abrams, yeah, Creighton Abrams, yeah, the 4-star general, yeah.
Yeah, he replaced Westmoreland.
Yeah.
And one thing I didn't like, I like flying helicopters from the right seat. I can fly fixed wing from the left seat, but I prefer the right seat. But there was this tradition that the aircraft commander on his ship had to fly left seat. So the whole second tour, I was sitting in the left seat. The other thing that wasn't a great idea is there is this rule on air bases that you don't salute out on the line, out on the tarmac. There's more important things to be worried about. But the tradition dictated that he would get out of his limousine, and I would have to get out of my down from the left door and stand there and salute. And he had this way of saluting, which was not strictly Army. he had a cigar always, and he put the cigar between these two fingers and salute with his cigar. So who's going to tell him, right?
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
people have asked, didn't that make you nervous? No, not at all. If I left the city limits of Saigon, I had a heavy gun team. That's three ships following me, and an empty chase aircraft in case my single engine Huey quit. Um, I would just auto rotate down, and the chase plane would come down. And the rule was myself, my crew, and the general and his staff would get into the chase plane, and the four crew members of the chase plane would have to sit there with my Huey. It didn't work. Um,
Mm.
it never happened, by the way, but that was the rule.
Right.
But um, everybody thought, well, all of that is to protect the 4-star, and I didn't think that way. I was thinking all of that was to protect me, because if I get home today, the general's going to be fine.
Yeah.
And we flew mostly 3-corps, southern 2-corps, northern 4-corps a little bit. And after flying the first tour with the Hornets, I knew every airbase, every frequency, every artillery frequency, every little pad, every big base. So he'd say, here's where I need to go. But the one thing that was really disheartening is the mission I flew to the embassy roof. So he could go down and talk to Ambassador Bunker. And there was never a time when he came back upstairs that he would plug in, and before he told me where he wanted to go next, or as Aide did, he'd plug in and say, the very first thing, goddamn politicians got my hands tied. That was disturbing after flying the first tour in combat. Just have a, it was discouraging. There's a thing called a no-fire zone, which was an area during the Vietnamization of the war where if you took fire, you weren't supposed to shoot back without getting permission. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
There's this quirky little rule in the military about you don't have to obey an unlawful order. And I just notched it up a bit and decided I wasn't going to obey a stupid order. And one might get my crew and myself killed. So my orders in a no-fire zone, it also never happened, but my orders in a no-fire zone, we're the only people over here with olive drab helicopters. It can't be a mistake if somebody's shooting at one of those things. So my crew was ordered, which took them off the hook. My orders were, you shoot back. So, no permission. You have my permission.
If just do the mental exercise of isolating these two tours, and let's say that the second tour was your only tour in Vietnam. What does the war look like from that perspective? From the perspective of a pilot flying a 4-star, you're also flying football players, and folks are coming in for USO shows and things like that. But your primary job is to fly around this 4-star. What does the war look like from that perspective?
My second tour, I was simply air taxi. If that would have been the only tour I flew, the learning curve would be huge because you have to learn the frequencies of the bases and the patterns of all these airfields. But basically, it was just an air taxi. Nobody shot at my aircraft the second tour. Saigon should have been beautiful because designed by the French. It was a beautiful city, but there was, I don't know how many millions of people there at the time. So way too many. But they had some great restaurants, and General Abrams never flew after dark, which I agreed with. Mm-hmm. And so there was a little bit of nightlife the second tour.
And so, well, just that nightlife, what are we talking about? Just places where a lot of GIs are in bars and things like that?
Yeah, and some great restaurants.
Right.
I remember the Cave, which was a great French restaurant downtown. Fresh lobster and a bottle of wine was like $10 American or less. I forget, but it was pretty cheap. real good. And there were several restaurants like that. Mekong there was the floating restaurant in the Saigon River, which later, fortunately, I wasn't there when it happened, got blown up. Um, and I was with a detachment of older pilots, because really the two 4-stars that were in Saigon, General Abrams' second in command was another 4-star in Hawaiian. And there was 5 pilots, a spare just in case one of us got sick, and 2 crews for these brand new shiny Hueys that we had. Unlike the 116th, these things were impeccable.
In Saigon, did you see some of the black market stuff that we hear a lot about?
Absolutely. That was infuriating. But it was very much like a flea market. Just a little stand, but when you went up close to the stand, they had the Nomex flight gloves, Army issue sunglasses, Army issue equipment, and it was broad daylight. I mean, this wasn't around a corner after dark. This was broad daylight, and they had the Vietnamese police, which somehow got the nickname the White Mice. I don't know where that came from, but they were always close by, so they were being taken care of too. But the infuriating part was the Army had to know. I mean, everybody that was based in Saigon knew, and they would drive by those same stands. And there's the equipment that should be out in a combat unit, and it's for sale. I wished I hadn't gone, wished I hadn't seen what I did, but I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. The education, the understanding, the better understanding of yourself, it's priceless. There's a fee for it. You got to pay for it. But what you learn about yourself and human nature, really, it's an incredible education. I wish nobody has to ever do it again, but it truly is amazing.
What did you learn about human nature?
A lot of guys have come back with different levels of PTSD. And according to the VA, I have a little bit of that. But what I came back with was every day is a gift. Just after flying those missions, the first tour, every day is a gift. You just got to appreciate that. And I've tried to live my life that way.